Thanks for checking out this video, and if you'd like to find out lots more information about the other courses and workshops I offer, both in person and online, simply visit my website at peterkeegan.com. I'm now going to look at putting in the highlights, and when the highlights are added, it should really bring the picture together. So I'm going to start off with my titanium white and going back into the greens. Now, some of the colour on your palette may still be wet, which is wonderful, and if it's dry, don't worry, you can go back and just end up remixing the variety of colours that you've already laid out onto your picture. So I've made a very, very pale green here. Back to squinting down and scribbling in this very, very pale green. And you want to offer a variety of pales. Try not to stick to the same colour. So occasionally, like now, I'm adding just a little bit of lemon yellow into the picture, just to give it that nice variety. Almost using pure white here, just to get that lovely light hitting this border on the right hand side. I'm not using pure white, that is slightly stained with the green that's on the palette. Now let's look at that fantastic shadow that leads your eye right the way up to the centre of the picture. So just covering up where that base yellow is coming through, to allow that path and that journey really come alive and become very inviting. Just putting just a little brighter green there as that lovely transition, all the way up to the top. So I feel like I've blocked in my darks, my mid-tones and highlights. I now want to start crisping it and bringing it all together. So I'm going to put down that brush, and I'm going to start taking out some of my smaller brush. So I've got a number 2 here, and again it's a filbert, and I'll probably take out a flat as well. And we'll start off with the flat brush, actually, just a hint of water. And I want to start looking at some of the interesting texture of the flowers on the left-hand side. So just allowing the brush just to sort of skip and dance really across the surface. And of course this is now offering a new mark. It's a much smaller shape compared to some of the larger areas and the broader brush strokes. We now have something that's a lot smaller and more focused, giving the illusion and the impression of all these flowers. Let's do the same on the right hand side. Right, let's look at some of these lighter greens at the top here. And you notice how I'm using the brush, I'm sort of twisting it around, making sure all the paint comes off the bristles, but at the same time giving that variety of mark making. And I've got that fantastic highlight just through the arch there. Now this is a really significant part of the picture because it allows me to place that bright pale green, almost pure white, but it is a pale green, to the left of it. And when you put light and dark right next to each other, your lightest value and your darkest value right next to each other, you get something that's very, very dynamic and very eye-catching. It will really draw your eye to look at that place first. And as a focal point, really important that I get that strong contrast. So now I've laid on these smaller, vibrant brush strokes. I want to do a very important part of the painting process, and that's called restating my darks across the whole picture, just to make sure those tonal levels are exactly where they should be. So using the same number 2 flat brush, I'm going to go and strengthen these darks. So I'm returning back to my raw umber, Viridian green, French ultramarine blue. Now, through the process of painting, you've started with our darks, and quite often, as the painting develops, those darks sometimes lose their intensity and their strength, and that's perfectly normal. That's just through the process of building up the layers and the midtones. And it's important just to ask yourself, are your darks as dark as they need to be? Do you need to intensify them or strengthen them or bring them back to where you originally had them? So it's a really crucial stage that's not to be missed. And by putting in your darks already, just by putting these few marks in this bottom left-hand corner, it suddenly makes your lights, your highlights, really zing and stand out. So if you are looking at a painting of yours and you think it is just a little bit too dark and a bit too dull, quite often it's strengthening a couple of the key darkest areas that will just make the picture, particularly those highlights, really jump out at you, as hopefully they're starting to do now. Now let's just look at the shadow inside the archway. So I'm getting a little bit closer now, obviously holding my brush much more in control, closer to the ferrule, that's the metal bit of the brush. Just make it just a little bit wider. There you go, just soften that edge just a little bit. Okay, so I'm fairly pleased with that. I just want to look at that archway just to make sure I've got the shape of it that reads very convincingly to the eye. So just using these purples, which is a mixture of the French ultramarine blue and either the crimson or the magenta. Just sort of brushing a range of marks across the brick just to give it that sense of texture without me having to paint individual bricks. That's something that I want to avoid. It'll kind of kill the illusion of the painting being very, very fresh and vibrant if there's a part of the picture that's very laboured and overworked. And it'd be very tempting to do that with something like a brick wall. Let's just bring out some of that strong pink of that lovely bush, a smoke bush I think it is, in front of the wall here. And again, sticking to that rule that if I am going to use a colour, let's bounce it around the rest of the picture. So bring out these last bit of colours and lights. These lovely directional marks. Now the last thing I really want to strengthen is just these highlights. So using this same brush, in fact I'm going to jump down to my filbert number 2, so it's a lot smaller with a nice little point, and I can get these and describe these lovely little marks to the tips of the flowers. I'm applying this very thickly with the acrylic, so they stand out. And it's not so much the flowers, but it's also the reflection of the light hitting the leaves that I'm looking to capture as well. And the more layers you put up, the more sort of denser your picture will get. It'll just have a lot more texture, a lot more qualities to it. And when you're describing something as textured as a really busy, vibrant garden scene, by building up all these multiple layers of big brush strokes and small brush strokes and darker tones through to your mid-tones and your lights, this is where you'll get that deep texture. You know, this technique is, you know, very, very similar to the way that the Impressionists would paint, building up many different layers upon some wet brush strokes and some dry brush strokes. And lastly, I just want to get a sense of that tree on the right hand side. So using my darks of the umber and the ultramarine and the green, I just want to get a sense of lovely vertical in the picture to sort of nicely balance what's going on the left hand side. So I put in the shadow first, and now going with just a hint of the highlight just to the left of the shadow. And then we can cover up just little bits of it, break it up. So using these little brush strokes just to strengthen your dark tones and your highlights is a real crucial part of bringing your picture together, making sure that everything is balanced appropriately, and also making sure that your eye is led to your focal point. So that's my approach to painting a sunny garden scene in acrylics.